Welcome to another episode of the Burnout Ladder Podcast, and in this episode I'll be interviewing Ryan, who's been through a burnout himself and is keen to tell us all about his experience. And you'll pick up on a few things, I'm sure, which will really help you, and that is my aim. Important to note that Ryan does a job in FMCG, as he describes, which is known as fast-moving consumer goods, and that's where I spent most of my career too, so I pretty much feel his pain doing an operations role in a very fast-moving environment. So spare a thought for him and listen to his story, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you on the podcast. We're talking about burnout, as you know, and just keen to understand, how did it all start for you? How did you realize that you had burnout?
I think the initial signs for me were, realistically, I was working or constantly thinking about work. So going in early, finishing late, and it was probably at the detriment generally of my emotional, physical health. I think there was then noticed really that I was concentrating a lot less on things, and I must have been different at home. So I didn't really notice this, but my wife did really. She'd picked up on the fact that I was a little bit different. I wasn't my normal self, quite chirpy, quite cheerful, quite outgoing. I was actually a little bit more reserved than normal, or must have been a lot more reserved than normal, realistically. So she'd picked up on that, and she'd sort of initially called it out. But I think the working or constantly thinking about work and that sort of taking over generally had been one of the initial signs, and probably something I could have picked up on a little bit earlier, I think.
Okay. So can you describe some of the key symptoms then? You talked about being emotional and also quite reserved. What were the other things you were seeing?
I think, yeah, I was looking back, definitely I was exercising less. I was eating a lot of unhealthy foods, going for convenience more than putting in a lot of effort. I think because I was putting in so much effort at work or when I was outside of work, still thinking about it, still doing bits and pieces, it was generally taking over. So then I just opted for convenience, just generally with everything else. So choosing not to exercise as much, maybe seeing my friends less, seeing family a bit less. And as a result, everything takes a little bit of a nosedive, and it ends up snowballing really, to the point where you take time off. You end up just feeling generally worse and worse and worse, because then you don't want to do much, and then it continues to manifest really.
So you did take time off?
Absolutely. So there was the odd day here and there where you take it off, you just didn't feel up to it and didn't necessarily realize what it was. The odd stressful day, and it took that off, and then sort of a couple of those times plus everything else, and really conversations with my wife, it was a case of actually, could you be burnt out, or could you be at least approaching that? And then after that, and conversations we'd had through that period, I took some sort of extended period from work, and I think that's combined with just changing the things I was doing, so exercising more, eating better, doing some chores, doing some acts of service, definitely helped get me back to being on the right track really.
What was that last bit again? I didn't catch that. Sorry.
It was helping getting me back on the right track. So eating a little bit better, exercising a lot more, just being out and around in nature. Thankfully, it was sort of during the summertime, so it was easier to get out, and you weren't getting washed away in sort of the northeast weather. But there was the benefit of the timing piece, I think, for me. But yes, just getting out more, taking the dog for a lot of walks, tiring him out, and myself, and then just doing some acts of service. Generally trying to look after my wife, the dog, a little bit more, doing more things around that, picking up more of the chores because I was off, and because I was not attending work, I was pouring my energy really into that, which was quite nice, and realized the fact that that's the important thing, not necessarily work.
So just for context, as I'm explaining in the introduction before you came on, you work in an operations background, don't you? It's a warehousing and logistics kind of role that you do.
It is. It's supply chain, so it's it's very full on. It's in FMCG, so a lot of moving parts, a lot of things happening at the same time, a lot of urgent requests, which is fine. As something of the nature of the job I enjoy, because it's very busy. There's a lot of conflicting priorities, and it is the nature of the beast in the industry I'm in. But with that in mind, I think the way it had been previously versus the way it is now, it was too much, and it was really, some of it was a fault of my own, taking on too much, not delegating enough, not saying no, not being able to have those conversations, or not willing to have those conversations. Maybe I think that's definitely something I've learned through this process, is just being upfront and clear about what can be done, what can't be done, and be willing to have those conversations to say, all of this that's been required and requested is too much, and should we have the conversation of what can be done and when it can be done, really.
So about managing your boundaries, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think setting those boundaries with myself about what I'll accept, because it's not saying there's no willingness to work over or pick up bits and pieces as they're required, but it's setting the expectation that that is an exception, it's not the rule. That is an ad hoc basis, and sometimes when we do it, and it's happening now, which is fine, but it's doing it because it's maybe an area of development, or doing it because I'm actually interested and I can learn from it and pick up new things here and there. But it's not actually doing it just to keep your head above water, which is where it realistically gotten to, because I'd allowed it to get there. So there's an element of that where I think, from picking up the early signs, that's how I would see it going forward. If it got to that point where I was working extra hours and taking on more just to keep my head above water, that's when it can very quickly manifest itself into burnout, as I've seen.
So you recognize the signs now, and so therefore next time you would be much more able to see those triggers. So I'm intrigued though, because you're still a young chap, aren't you? So had you had this? How old are you, if you don't mind me asking, Ryan?
30 now.
Grand old age of 30. And had this ever happened to you before?
I think, looking back, probably.
Okay.
Maybe not to this degree. But there will have been an element of this happening previously. Realistically, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've changed roles a couple of times, so I've probably not necessarily been somewhere for 3 or 4 years where I can see this manifest itself over a really extended period of time. But I think during the period that we were having these conversations and this was happening, it was definitely happening more than it probably had in the past, and it had for a sort of a continuous period. Whereas I think now, if I picked up on those early warning signs and those triggers, I can do something about it at such an early stage, not to the point where I didn't really want to get out of bed, or I was phoning in sick and I wasn't 100% sure why. I just knew I wasn't feeling up to actually getting out of bed or going to work.
Yeah, and you mentioned, right early on that it was your wife that picked it up. Do you think you would have picked it? Would have taken much longer for you to pick it up, or?
Absolutely. I don't know if it's a general thing that blokes do, where we play it down. When it's ourselves, we tend to play it down. It'll be fine. We're okay. We'll just crack on. When realistically, that's not the case. So I think it for me, it took my wife calling me out, essentially, to say that she believes it's some level of burnout, where if it was left to me and I was left to my own devices, Christ, when would I have picked it up? Ever? Probably, I'd hope so, but not necessarily certain, realistically. So I think being able to see those early warning signs without somebody needing to point it out is good.
Well, that's true. And I remember you and I talked at the time, and I remember we were discussing the situation you were in, and you said about not wanting to get out of bed, that signs of depression, which is often equated with the later stages of burnout. I think you'd recognized it, but it probably just took a lot longer, didn't it? So this is the important point, is we can wait an awful long time before we really realize that, hey, it's burning. It's like the frog in the boiling water analogy, it suddenly realizes that the water's getting too hot and it's too late to do anything about it. In
It
your
is.
case, it was never going to be too late, I don't believe, but you could have made life easier for yourself by following those signs earlier on.
Absolutely. And I didn't get to the point where it was catastrophic, where it was, the really latter stages of the burnout. I didn't get to that, thankfully, because we were able to have the conversations relatively early. And to be fair, my wife picked up on it relatively early. But it could have got a lot worse. And I'd like to think I'd have picked up on it and tried to do something about it. And I was lucky that I'd already been looking for a new role, and I'd moved, or I was in the process of moving somewhere else. So I think I've managed to get off the ladder fairly quickly, which was good. And I appreciate that not everybody's able to be in that sort of situation. So if you can pick it up early and then do something about it, and even if you aren't able to, if the root cause is you won't need to get out of the situation, but even if you aren't able to do that, there's still some other coping mechanisms, some things you can put in place to sort of get through.
That's right. So you recognize what was missing and that you put back in place, like exercising and diet. Was there anything else that was particularly successful for you?
Yeah, I think those two things were something I'd done a huge amount more when I had that time off, when I essentially forced myself to do that. I'd sort of something had clicked. We'd had the conversation. It was a case of actually let's get yourself outside more. Let's get out of bed and sort of force yourself to move. I think that only needed to be the case for the first day or so. But then I was doing some sort of meditating on a night initially right at the start when we'd started our conversations, because that was one of the times when I found it the hardest, because that's when you were thinking about the day ahead. What's that going to entail? What's going to come in? What have I maybe not done, or what's not being done? Or what will I need to pick up? And that's when sort of the worry starts, the doubt starts. Did I do this? Should I do this? What's happening? And then you sort of think, well, actually, should I just log on for half an hour? Will that actually make things better? Would it make things worse? And you end up having this fight with yourself when really you should be enjoying your time at home or relaxing. But that tends not to be the case. So I think meditating helped me focus more on just my breathing, relax, get out of my own head, basically.
Yeah, which is, and it's a crazy thing we do, isn't it? Which is spend all this time at home worrying about work when we're not at work, and it doesn't really give us much, but we just can't help doing it because they're the problems that we have to solve that are right in front of us. So yes, that's a bit of a foible of the mind, really, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But meditation is a great way of addressing that, as you've found out. So would you say you're glad, in a sense, that it happened? Really?
I think it's really brought it to the fore, because I think realistically now with with sort of friends or colleagues or even the wife, if you start seeing those early warning signs, and I know, I've mentioned a couple of mine. I think another one really is when I become disorganized and a bit scattered. That's when one of the signs for me that I'm not necessarily in control. So I don't know necessarily what's happening. And then you then end up being a little bit of a busy Phil, because you're just trying to run around and try and do everything as opposed to have a sort of a plan, really. And I think realistically, it gave me some good coping mechanisms. It's also forced me to sort of exercise and get out and eat more, which is good, and eat healthier, not eat more, because that's not necessarily the case. But it's helped me with that, and I think without having the burnout or having a level of the burnout, would I have done that, or would I have needed to? Maybe not, but it's helped me understand more about myself and how I react to these sorts of situations, and it puts the onus maybe back on me and my reaction to a situation as opposed to the actual situation itself.
Well, yeah, because I suppose we all have a choice, don't we? Whatever environment we're placed in, and as we talked about in your case, there was something about how you get your team to help you, and maybe there's a win-win in that you give them some more responsibility, which they enjoy, and that takes it off you, and that's a learning process, isn't it? And I don't think anybody can really teach you that.
No, and I think that's where, especially in a world of work and business, we sometimes neglect to teach people that. And that's maybe something you learn the hard way, and maybe that's the case. But I think generally we could all probably do better at teaching our teams that. And when people become managers and managers of bigger teams and take on more responsibility, that's something that we need to spend time on teaching people and showing them how the best ways to do this, and just reminding them that is an option, that they don't have to take everything on or feel like they take everything.
Yeah, and it's a human trait, which is wanting to protect your team, but by not protecting yourself, you're not doing that, are you? That's the irony of that situation.
It is, because you end up taking too much on, then you have less time for the team. They then don't get any opportunity to show what they're capable of, or grow, because you've chucked those things on because you believe you're protecting them, when realistically you're actually not. But in your mind, that's how it seems.
Yeah. So, but you've obviously really turned the corner. You've got a new job now, and that's going really well, and you seem really happy and really in control, and you've really got a hold of this thing. What's the thing you tell yourself to prevent you going back onto the burnout ladder?
I think realistically, just reminding myself of doing those things, spending more time outside, meditating, exercising, eating better, and keeping those sort of boundaries with work, and understand that, if I ever feel like I need to work, go in early, stay late, or work on an evening, that it's for the quote unquote right reasons. It's not just to keep your head above water, and it's not just to maintain this facade that everything can be done no matter what the deadlines are all of the time. It's actually to get a project over the line that we're trying to do, or it's a little bit of a development thing for me, or it's to support the team, or it's to cover the odd holiday or absence. It's not necessarily just the status quo that you will, work 70 hours a week because it just needs that. Realistically, that's not going to do anything for anyone. So
And as you said, earlier, it's picking your battles and making it the exception, that extra work, the exception rather than the rule, isn't it? Because we all have to do that from time to time.
And I think there's the element of speaking to the people that's closest to you, because they'll know, they'll spot a change in you. They might not want to say something, so if you mention something, or if you approach a subject, they might be more willing to offer up their thoughts and their opinion, because generally they'll pick up on something that's changed if you might not have.
So what's the one piece of advice you would give to anybody that felt they might be suffering from burnout?
I think have those conversations. If you can speak to an expert, self therapist, or just have those conversations with family members, the people that are closest to you, get their feedback. They might, they might have a burning desire to tell you what they've not. They might actually be able to say, well, you've stopped doing X, Y, and Z that you love doing. Is there a reason? And then that provokes more conversations. But I think, as a minimum, just have those conversations. Just open up. Blokes are definitely the worst. We tend not to. We tend to push it all down, and then it sort of comes out one way, usually the bad way. But I think just opening up, having those conversations, whether it be through sort of the burnout ladder and the conversations you can have through that, taking those notes, whether it be just your other half. There's a million different options, and generally men are willing and wanting to listen. We're just not very great at starting that conversation.
It's an interesting point you make, that you can't just wait for somebody to tell you, because there's something going on inside them that thinks, well, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, So there's two things going on, and if you open up the gate for the dialogue, then there's more chance of having it.
Excuse me. Exactly. It allows you to also be a little bit in control, because you're asking them, you're bringing it to their attention, but realistically they probably already know.
Yeah, they'll see the signs in you, won't they? Whether it's emotional behavior on your part, or whether you look pale, tired, whatever it is, they'll see the signs, but they might not want to talk about it, which is an interesting point. So maybe it is down to you as the sufferer to open up the dialogue.
If you feel comfortable to, that's definitely, I think, the best way.
But the thing is, we're not alone, are we? That lots of people are suffering this way. And so you may find that you learned something from somebody else because they're suffering too.
Exactly, especially in the modern world where, businesses generally are trying to do more with less, and we're all trying to do the best job we can. There's sometimes feels a need to sort of continually, not even necessarily go above and beyond, but go even further than that and do it at a detriment to yourself. Whereas, if you can have that conversation, there'll be people in the same boat or a very similar one that can offer some support and advice, and even just having the conversation is a great way to start.
Good. It's also a great way to end, because I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, Ryan. We'll bring this to a close now. Thanks so much for your time and all the learning that I've had from you as well as we've gone through this process together. Again, a really good story, I think, of someone who's been through very difficult times, recognized it and put good plans and habits in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again, because it easily can if we just allow ourselves to slip. So well done to you. Long may it continue. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure.